Israel just announced that its forces recovered 3 bodies of Israelis taken hostage from the music festival on October 7th. Meanwhile, trucks carrying humanitarian aid began rolling into Gaza Friday using a temporary pier built by the U.S., delivering desperately needed supplies. The floating dock is part of a makeshift effort by the U.S. to compensate for a number of crossings that have been shut and are crucial to supply the food, fuel, and other supplies.
500,000 people have fled the southern city of Rafah as Israel presses forward with its promised assault. Originally, Rafah was deemed a safe haven for people to flee, and numbers of displaced swelled to nearly 2 million. The situation on the ground has been described as desperate, with the United Nations describing Gaza near the verge of famine.
Meanwhile, back at home, RFK Jr. came on Russell Brand's podcast and declared his support once again for Israel. Let's watch.
I don't believe that there's a genocide going on, and I don't think Israel's intention is genocide. I don't believe there's any evidence of genocide. There is genocide going on in the Mideast, but it's a genocide of Jews, and it's a genocide of Christians, and nobody's complaining about it for some reason. And there are much worse wars than what's happening in Gaza right now, but for some reason, people don't want to complain unless it's Jews who can be blamed. The idea of saying that there's a genocide going on in Israel because people die in war, and that in every war that's going on in the world today, there are civilians dying, and the average death rate, civilian to combatant death rate, according to the United Nations and to the Institute for the Study of Urban Warfare at West Point, is about 9-1. In Gaza, it's about 1-1. So they've achieved they protected in the most challenging conditions. The Israeli government the IDF has protected civilians better than any army in history. John Spencer said it has done more to protect civilians under more difficult circumstances than any army in history.
So what did you make there, Jessica, of RFK's talking about the ratio of civilian to military casualties in various wars? He claimed that the civilian to military casualty ratio in the Israel-Gaza war is much lower than it typically is in combat.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I mean, there's official statistics from human rights agencies around the world that go directly against what RFK Jr. said right there. I mean, from the IDF directly, they've described the ratios of civilians to combatants that they desire as like 3-1 in some cases. And so when you think about this coming directly from them, RFK Jr.'s statement there is ridiculous. To say also that Christians and Jewish people are being genocided in the Middle East, what is he referring to? Because what we're talking about right now is the war by Israel on Gaza and Palestine. The casualties are over 35,000 Palestinians and around 1,400 Israelis. So to look at those numbers and to assess the ICJ case, there was just additional evidence added by South Africa in their case against Israel for genocide in the International Court of Justice, where they found evidence of Israel using extermination zones, which is, a key component of many genocides and a part of how they define and prosecute genocides. And so when you look at the facts of just the death toll of what's going on in Gaza and now Rafah, to have Netanyahu say there can be no Palestine, there can be no self-governance of Gaza post-war, to have the United States saying, well, we disagree with that, to have members of the Netanyahu administration saying there are no innocent people in Gaza, these are ridiculous statements. To have the death toll be what it is and say there's not a genocide against Palestinians when there's been plausible evidence of a genocide against Palestinians as determined by the International Court of Justice, and to look at the death toll of Israelis, it's just absolutely ridiculous coming from RFK Jr.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his point of doing the whataboutism was on the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, but that is true. I mean, in places like Syria and Libya, there is consistent persecution of Christians, including mass murder, but sort of separate from the point. Let's get into the politics of this, because if you're someone who is pro-Palestinian on the left, you're not happy with the Biden administration's posture on the war, but you're also not happy with what RFK says. I mean, he's actually probably vociferously more pro-Israel than Biden is. So what do you do in November? Who do you vote for? Do you vote at all?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden certainly doesn't have my vote. Donald Trump doesn't have my vote. I don't see RFK Jr. as a viable alternative. I think a lot of people who are on the far left, who are very critical of Joe Biden for the ongoing genocide, are facing this very difficult decision of, do we vote for someone who's been a pro-labor president in some respects, who's passed public funding that's led to big infrastructure projects that are necessary through the bipartisan infrastructure law, where you have billions of dollars allocated to good paying union jobs, resulting in potentially national rail networks, the first high-speed rail being completed in the US, and the Buy America requirements, ensuring that a lot of the manufacturing, not just building the railroad itself, is going to happen in the US, and it's going to be good union jobs. How do you trade that off, what he's done for workers within America versus how he supported Israel undyingly during this genocide? And so I think many people are facing an impossible decision. I think many people will not cast a ballot for US president. And I think they'll vote down ballot to ensure that Congress looks much more like their views, that we have representatives that will ensure that the right to abortion is codified. I think that's motivating a lot of people to go to the polls. And I think people want to ensure good legislation passes through the House and Senate, regardless of who's president. A lot's on the line locally in terms of who's running for governor and who's running for state house and state senate. And I think we're going to see a lot of people like me on the left really motivated to go to the polls, for everyone else's position other than the presidency.
All right, fair enough. Thanks for breaking that down, Jess. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. More Rising after this.